On Thanksgiving evening, after all the food was eaten and dessert was had, and the family was sitting around relaxing, my three daughters got on a train of thought and conversation regarding the music that they listened to when they were teenagers. And so they kept bringing up on their phones music by Amy Grant and DC Talk and Newsboys and Stephen Curtis Chapman, and even some musicals that they had sung in with the choir at church when they were teenagers. And along with listening to them, we were all joining in and singing loudly. And apparently this wasn't such a blessing to all of the grandchildren. And at one point, one of the girls said, "Hey, this was the soundtrack of our lives." And that thought really struck me, that as they looked back on their teenage years, this music was the soundtrack of their lives. And much of it was music that pointed them to God and to his characteristics and to the fact that he can be trusted and to the way that Christians should respond to God and should respond to the world around us. And it got me thinking about, what is the soundtrack of our lives today? Is the soundtrack of our lives some kind of talk radio or political diatribe that pulls us apart, that causes disunity? Is the soundtrack of our lives true crime podcasts that dwell on the vilest things that happen in our society? Is the soundtrack of our lives music that maybe glorifies violence or sex, and that the words we would think maybe aren't so uplifting? What is the soundtrack of our lives today? Maybe it's just television on in the background so that there is some noise, regardless of whether the show is worthwhile or not worthwhile. When Paul was writing to the Philippians, he gave them some guidelines for what you could call the soundtrack of their lives. In chapter 4 and verse 8, he said, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence, and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things," or ponder these things. In other words, let the things that fill your mind, the things you dwell on, the things you ponder, the things that are constantly playing in our brains, let them be true and honorable and right and pure and lovely, of good repute and excellent and praiseworthy. So I would encourage you today, as you think about, what is the soundtrack of my life? What are the things that my mind is dwelling on? What are the things that I ponder? Where is my time spent in terms of input into my brain and whatever medium that is? I would encourage you today to think about, does the soundtrack of my life promote these things that Paul is talking about? Or does the soundtrack of my life cause me to think about things that are unlovely and untrue, that are not praiseworthy, that maybe, truth be told, if people knew about it, I'd be a little bit ashamed? So I would encourage you today, let's make the soundtrack of our lives something that uplifts us and that glorifies God, and something that maybe we might be willing to share with the next generation should that opportunity arise.